In this lesson, I want to show you how you can add forms to your web pages. So forms are a really essential part of any website. If you want your users to be able to send you some information, communicate with you, then you need to add in a form. So within this project, I'm going to add in a form right at the bottom within my footer, and I'm going to set up just a really basic form here. And again, it starts out with opening and closing of form tags. So opening, closing, and the content within here is what we're going to be utilizing for the form. So maybe if you want to do something really simple like a newsletter sign up or something like that, so you need to get something like the user's first name. And typically what we usually do for forms is we add in form. So we've got a number of different form options. So input. So the input type, and there's several different input types. As you can see here, brackets is actually giving me a whole bunch of suggestions. So we've got button, checkbox. We've got some new ones with HTML5, so we can do color, date, and so on. So this one is just a really typical text one. So just open, close, and we also need to add in some additional attributes in here. So we've specified one of the attributes that it's a text input field. We also need to specify a name for it. And the reason that we need to specify a name is because we need some way of actually picking up this information and being able to identify this wherever it's being submitted. You can also use ID. So ID is a way to apply styling to it and so on. And if you've got some JavaScript, ID is usually a great way to go to make that connection between the contents of the form. We also have some additional options, so I'll just save that and we'll take a look at our web page now, see what it looks like. And we can see there we've got our form element. So let's actually copy all of this, pop over to CodePen, and place our form in there. And the reason I want to bring it into CodePen is because I want to apply a bunch of different input types here, and I want to be able to show you right away what they look like. So I'm going to do a line break here, and you might also want something like the email. So you want to pick up that user's email address. So we're going to do type, and instead of text, so we could do text, it would look the same, but let's do another one here called email. So give it a name and equal it to email. So again, you don't have to be really that specific with that. I can get rid of those ones because I'm not going to be adding any styling to this. This is just for demonstration purposes. So now we've got one called email, and we see we can type in some text in there. And what is missing on this form? So we type in some text here, but we actually have no button to submit this form. So we need to add that button in. So let's go ahead and create another type. So we've got several ways where we can do input, we can do type, and you saw that we had an option for button. So we can do an input type button, set a value for submit or something like that, and close that off. So that gives us a button to submit it. But it's actually not working because it's just the type is just a button, and it's not actually being specific that this is our submit button. So we need to be able to specify that what we want our button to do. We want to make it submit. So there's a number of different ways to accomplish this, where we can set, instead of a button, what we want this to do is actually submit our form. So by default changes it to submit button. Even if I was to get rid of the value here, we see by default the browser knows that this is a submit button, so it'll give it submit. When I click the button, it tries to actually submit the content here. So here, let's update the email, and this is where it gets really interesting because I've specified this as email and I try to submit it, we get this message that says please include the @ in the email address. And this is new with HTML5 because this gives us the ability essentially to say what type of input we're expecting. So it checks and it sees before we submit it that making sure that the user is actually submitting email information in there. We also have additional fields, so I'm going to just do a default here, and we've got ones where we can specify the type, so we can do something like number, and I'm going to get rid of that. So we've got a number here, so if I try to type in text in here, it's not going to let me. Make sure that I always have a number in there. I can also update this, do color. So we get the color picker popping up. And these are all brand new with HTML5. We see we've got a whole bunch of really nice different types that we can really utilize. We also have ones that previously with HTML5, so we had ones, so I'm going to get rid of that, and we had radio buttons. So these are the radio buttons, and typically with radio buttons you'd have two. And one other thing with radio buttons is make sure that so if you've got two radio buttons, make sure that the name is the same, and that gives us the ability to have this type of effect where we click on one, it can toggle between them. So always making sure that we have at least one radio button. If we're using radio buttons, make sure you have a couple of them, keep the name the same in order to be able to toggle between them. We have another type here where we can specify that if we need a checkbox. This is another type here. So similar to the radio buttons, we can change this into a checkbox if we wanted to. So we've got a number of different ones. Some of them a really nice one here with HTML5, we've got date. So we've got this default calendar that pops up, and we can specify the date, and that automatically populates it. We saw that we could do email, text, number. We've got a URL. So this is another useful one, because if I try to type something in here, so that's not a URL, and if I submit it, we get that same error message that we got with the email. So making sure that our text that we're expecting is actually what the user is putting in. So a number of other ones that you might see. So we might see text. So there's text area. And this one is going to be different than their typical one. So we've got text area here, and the content is actually sitting in between here. Doing everything just with attributes, we've got content in here that we've got in the middle, and we see that output is being output there. And then here is where we could specify the name. So we have our text area or whatever we want to call it, and we see that the output sits in the middle. So this is another type of input where we can specify we have a whole bunch of content we want to pull in, and so on. So along with a whole range of these different tags that we can use in these attributes, we also have the ability to add some more specific attributes within our HTML forms. So I'm going to show you more on this in the upcoming lesson.